What's up, guys? Welcome back to Spooktober21. Welcome back to Project Potter. Guys, welcome to night 23. This is our second movie review that we're doing for Spooktober21. My name is Kyle, guys, your host. If you haven't been to the channel before, welcome. Go check out the other content. If you guys do like the content, please consider liking, commenting, subscribing. But either way, guys, I do appreciate you stopping by. We are doing Hocus Pocus tonight, and yes, this is my first time watching this movie as well. I've seen bits and pieces of this movie, but I've never sat down and watched this movie from start to finish, and I didn't really remember any of this movie. So this was basically a fresh watch for me. Very strange coming off of The Shining last night that I saw for the first time. So back-to-back movies I've never seen before. Way different tone, obviously, for this movie. So different audiences. But I'm going to go over, guys, kind of a quick recap with this one. My favorite scenes, my least favorite scenes, and then my score to 10. That's pretty much it. So if you guys have seen other Project Potter reviews, these are kind of the same format. But like I said, guys, appreciate you stopping by. Welcome to Spooktober. And we're going to get right into it. So Hocus Pocus, this is a strange movie because I know it's like a cult classic and like it's one of everyone's favorites. This movie is not for me, really. I didn't hate it, but we'll get into that in just a bit. But basically, guys, the premise of this movie, there are these witches, and they're in, I don't know what year it is. Oh, they say it's 300 years ago. From, is it 93? I forget. It's like late 90s, present day, I think, or early 90s, and then I think it's 300 years before that. So these witches are here. It starts with this boy, Binks. I forget his first name, but he eventually becomes the cat Binks. And he's like, "Where's my sister Emily? Have you seen Emily anywhere?" And he's like running away. He's like, "Hello, have you seen her?" He sees like a witch's house in the distance with the colored lights going up there. He runs over there. They have his sister Emily, and then they end up sucking like the soul from his sister, and they turn him into a cat. Because they want to get younger. And I'm like, this is very strange premise, dude. Like, so their whole thing is that like they're going to eat children or like suck their souls from them so that they can be younger and they can live forever. It's very like dark and like, I don't know if this should be a Disney movie for kids, really, considering these witches are eating the kids. But anyway, they actually get caught, and then like the villagers come over and they're like, "What have you done with my son?" And she's like, "Cat's got my tongue." And I'm like, "Oh, okay." But these witches get hung or hanged, as they say, and there's like a book. They have a book made of human flesh with the eye, and she's like, "Wake, my darling, wake." And she puts the main witch. Anyway, the main witch. She's like, "Oh, I made a spell, so we're gonna live forever, but it's in my book." And so someone has to like light the candle to bring us back, or whatever, after we're dead. So they get hanged, and then 300 years later, we cut to Max Dennison, and he is a new kid in town. He just moved in from Hollywood, or from LA, as he says, and there's a scene where it cuts to present day. The teachers, they're in Salem, and the teachers going through and selling all the spooky tales, and everyone's into Halloween. And then Max is like, "I don't believe in any of that." And they're like, "Oh, we have a skeptic." And he's like, "Yeah, I don't believe in any of that stuff." And they're like, "Why not?" And they're like, "Well, they say like, you know, the day of Halloween is the one night that the spirits can come back." And reminded me a lot of Coco, actually, but much different vibe in Coco. I thought Max was going to fucking break out a guitar and be like, "Remember me," but he did not do that. So, but yeah, this chick, Allison, who's like the hot girl in class, she's like, "Actually, it said that witches come back from this, blah, blah, blah." And he's like, "Oh, yeah." And then power move by Max here, he puts his number down and he goes, "You know what, if Jimi Hendrix shows up tonight, give me a call." When you lay down a power move like that, that's it, dude. Game over for that girl. She's like, "Oh, okay, I guess I'm going to be with this guy now," because that was just a power move. So he then like goes and like is riding his bike by her in class outside. And he's like, "Hey, I didn't mean to embarrass you in class." And I was like, "Bro, you already made the power move. You can't go back. Don't bring it back." But she's like, "Oh, do you believe in Halloween?" He's like, "Nah, none of that stuff." She's like, "Nothing?" And he's like, "Nope." And she's like, "Well, trick or treat." And she gives him back the paper. And it's like, "Oh, is her number going to be on there?" Nah, she's like, she just rejects him. And I was like, kind of a bitchy move there. Eventually, we find out that Max's younger sister, Danny, they have a really cute dynamic. They go trick-or-treating. They end up at this like creepy house or spooky house or this big, they call it the rich people house. And it turns out that Allison is actually the one that lives here. And they're having like an old-fashioned party. Like everyone's dressed up like I'm guessing from like the old Salem days and 300 years ago. So she's like, oh, I thought you weren't into Halloween. And then he's like, oh, yeah, it's not too bad. There's a great scene where his sister Danny says, Max really likes your, what does he call them? Yabos? And he like spits his drink out and she's like, oh, yeah? And he's like, yeah, he likes them. You know what? He loves those Yabos. And I was like, okay, obviously we all know what she's talking about there. That was cute. And then that's kind of like their dynamic. They end up going to this old spooky house, which I think I'm 99% sure is the same house where the witches were originally in the opening scene. And then they're like reading through and they're like, oh, I found a lighter. And Max is using the lighter around there. And he's like, oh, he reads the inscription or whatever. And he's like, if I light the candle, like these are going to come back. He's like, so why don't we meet the old broads? Elson and Danny are like, nah, dude, don't do that. And he's like, please, it's not going to do anything. I'm just going to do it. And then he lights it. And then the witches come back and then, they go after him. He ends up taking the book and they go away. And then the whole movie, guys, basically is them chasing them with the book. But they're like, don't open it, because as we find out at the end of the movie, it shoots up like this huge, like late light. So it like shows them where the book is. But it's like a fun back and forth where the witches are going through and they're all goofy and they're obviously have never been in modern times. So they're like, there's a funny bus scene where the bus driver is like, he's like, oh, you beautiful creatures. He's like, come on in my bus. I'll show you what's going on. And I was like, this guy, man, he's just living the life. At the end, guys, so again, I am actually going to not spend a lot of time on the recap this time. I say that every episode, but I feel like I'm actually going to do a good job because there's a whole lot going on. And it's just kind of like the overall story is that they're trying to tell everyone the witches are back. We need to stop them. And the cat, Binks, ends up being that boy who was turned into a cat from earlier. He's been waiting out in the house for 300 years. But then he eventually talks, and Max is like, what? He talks. There's a whole thing, guys. But at the very end, they are like fighting, and then like there's a zombie Billy or whatever. I don't know who this guy is. I didn't really. Some guy from the past, obviously. His mouth was sewn shut, and then he takes like Max's knife one of the times and just cuts it open. And he's like, finally. He calls her. He's like, wench. He's like, I've been meaning to call you a wench for 300 years. But he's a good zombie, as they call him, and he's working with them. But eventually, guys, they take Danny, and then Max ends up like drinking the potion to actually save Danny's life because Binks tells him like, hey, no matter what, you don't know how precious she is until she's gone. So he's like, you have to take care of Danny. And Max takes that to heart. And they had a pretty good relationship already, Max and Danny, but this is nice because he drinks the potion. He's like, now you have to take me. He's like, you have to take me instead of Danny. So they drop Danny. And then they're going to take Max and try to like suck his soul or eat him or whatever. And then the sun comes up and they ran out of time because the whole thing is that they have to get the potion and drink it before the sunrise or they'll be gone forever. Yeah, they're saved at the end. And then obviously everyone lives happily ever after. That's pretty much the expedited premise, guys. I'm sure people have seen this movie a million times. But going into my favorite scenes here, guys, the scene where they go see Satan is hilarious. The guy dressed in the Satan outfit, and he's like, come on in. And it's like his wife is like on the couch, and she's got like things in her hair, and they're like, oh, it's Medusa. And he's like, oh, they're calling him master and stuff. And like she goes upstairs, and he's like dancing with Sarah, the blonde witch. And he's like, she comes down, and she's like, all right, party's over. She's like, get the hell out of my house. And he's like, oh, they call me master. And she's like, yeah, just wait till you see what I'm going to call you. Oh, that was a really funny scene. Another scene I really liked, guys, I mentioned earlier was the bus scene. I thought that was pretty funny. There were some funny moments. I mean, when they're like, I smell children, and they're like, what's going on? These kids are all in costumes. They're like, it seems like this Hallows Eve is like a celebration now. So it was fun to see them interact with everything. They get tricked a couple times where Max is like, oh, mess with the great Max, now you must deal with the rain of death. And he turns off the fire alarm or the sprinkler system, and then they're like, oh, it's just water. And then later on, he's like, daylight savings time, and then he turns the light on, the headlights. So a couple of times where like you're like, oh, that wouldn't work, but then you think like they've never been in this world before. So I like those scenes. So the movie is kind of filled through those quippy lines. A lot of it was a little too cringy for me. I appreciate it, and a couple lines got me, but the tone is just not my cup of tea. But going on to the worst scenes here, guys, there weren't really any awful scenes. There were some interesting bits of dialogue, but for the most part, it was pretty good. Off the top of my head, I can't really think of anything like I feel like there has to be some bad scenes, and I'm not saying this is a perfect movie because it's definitely not. And I wouldn't give this, spoilers, I wouldn't give this a 10 out of 10. But thinking about it, I'm like, there's not really too many things that are too crazy. I guess if I had to pick one, I would say the cat where Binks gets run over by the bus, and then he like comes back into life, and he's like, I told you I can't die. I get the scene, but it wasn't really necessary, I don't think. But a lot of these scenes that I had problems with were like where they go to the party and they're like, the witches are back, the witches are back. And they're like, oh, okay. They're like, how much candy have you had? It's nice because everyone's like in a costume and like they go to a party and like the witches are there, but they just think it's like these great outfits. And they're like, wow. And she's just, I'll put a spell on you. And they start singing to it and she tells them to dance until they die. If you think about it, if these kids came up, no one would believe them. Like, even if this shit was happening, they would like, they're like, the witches are going to eat the kids. Like, we have to stop them. And they're like, oh, okay. Another good scene I didn't mention, guys, when they go to see the cop and the officer, and he's like, are you really a virgin? And it's weird that they brought up the virgin thing a lot, because I was like, this is not really a kid's movie. And he's like, no, you know what? Go away. Get away from me or whatever. And the kids run away. And then it turns out he's just a guy dressed as a cop because his girlfriend comes out and she's like, what was that all about? And he's like, oh, these kids just busted my chain. He's like, they thought I was a real cop. But yeah, no one would believe them because why would they? That's crazy talk. So especially because like they tell the stories over and over every year, and they're like part of the Halloween spirit if they get into that story. So yeah, there weren't really too many bad scenes overall, even if I didn't absolutely love the movie. Okay, guys, my favorite character in this movie, it's actually got to be Max. I actually really liked Max. I thought at the beginning he was this like kid that was just like, oh yeah, he was gonna be like the dumb jock kid. Not even jock, just like the new kid, but like he actually, like, I really loved his relationship with his sister Danny. Like, I thought that was really nice. So she calls him like jerk face and stuff, and he like kind of gets mad at her, but it's like growing up with a sibling, it's like you're not actually mad at them, and it's just sweet the way he like goes to he takes Danny out trick-or-treating at the beginning of the movie, and like the bullies, the kid that's like fucking James Franco and Draco Malfoy like morph together. And then Ice, guys, can we talk about how Ice is like a 45-year-old man? And he's like, my name's not Ernie. He's like, it's Ice. He's like, you should know that. I've been in 12th grade for like 14 years, dude. He's got ice in the back of his head. But I was like, dude, that's a 45-year-old man that's playing that actor. So that character. Originally, they take his shoes, super weird move, and they're like giving him a hard time. They're like, Hollywood. And then obviously at the end, they get trapped in the cages, and he doesn't. He just leaves them in the cages. And I was like, as a human being, you should probably save them. But I was like, you know what? Those kids, they deserve to be in those cages. That's okay. He goes trick-or-treating. He like turns down a party, or he doesn't really want to go trick-or-treating. He's not into Halloween at the beginning of the movie. And so, but Danny's like, please, I want to go. And so he's like, go. There's a line where he says like, just go on your own. You're 8. And I was like, oh, dude, like, no. He, is a good big brother, and he goes and takes her out. And then they're like making fun of her costume or whatever. And he was like, hey, back off, that's my little sister. And he gives up his candy so they can keep going. So I thought the relationship was great, and I thought Max was really good. I thought his dynamic with Allison was really cute too. I thought they had a really nice, like, at first she wasn't interested, and then very quickly they like go through on this adventure. And then I really like that scene where they like cuddle, or she like goes back and they cuddle, and I was like, oh, this is actually really like nice. They had good chemistry on screen. So Max was my favorite character for this one. Okay, guys, worst character, it's actually going to be 2 characters. It's going to be Draco Malfoy, James Franco, and Ice, or Ernie, because they were just the classic bullies where they were just like douchebags for no reason. And even when they were like caught, they weren't redeemable. Like Max is like, I'm just going to leave you up there. They were just bullies for the sake of bullies, like just to be antagonists. And I was like, I don't know. I wish there was like a lesson where they were like, I'm so sorry. Like, we picked on you before. Like, we almost got turned into fucking stew. Maybe we should be nicer. But they just were kind of just like shitty the whole time. And I was just like, all right. But I did think it was funny that Ice was played by a 85-year-old man trying to play like a 14-year-old kid. So that was pretty good. But yeah, they were my least favorite. Okay, guys, that brings us to the score. I don't want to get any hate in the comments here. I know people are going to disagree. Not my kind of movie. This is like a 90-minute movie. I was looking at the clock for a lot of this one. It felt like a drag for a lot of it for me. I can see the appeal. There's some good lines in there. It was a fun movie at times, but for me, this is a 7-1. I'm not going to watch this movie again. I'm glad that I experienced it, and I can see the appeal again for other audiences. It just, and maybe it's a disservice to this movie where I'm coming off of The Shining last night, where I loved that movie, and it was a dark tone, and the acting was so good. This was like a Disney Channel movie. This was like over the top acting. It was silly. It was like there weren't any real consequences, even though they touched on some dark tones. I would like an R-rated Hocus Pocus. Obviously, they're not going to do that, but although it's weird that they have the witches are trying to eat kids, and they talk about like virgins, and I'm like, this isn't really a kids movie. This is like a teenager movie kind of, but then the acting isn't up to par in some ways. So I don't know. I mean, it's okay. I mean, it's good to watch around Halloween season, but personally, like if it's between this and something like Nightmare Before Christmas, which I love, I'm going Nightmare Before Christmas every time, or Shining, or like Halloween, or any of the other movies instead of this. So if I get hate for this, I understand it. I totally get it. If you guys love this movie, that's great for you. It's just not my type of movie. So I respect your opinion, but hopefully you respect mine, and just know that this is just not something I would watch again. But overall, still glad I experienced it. Okay, guys, that's another night of Spooktober21. This is night 23, so we are continuing with the movie reviews here, guys. We'll have another one tomorrow night. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this. Hopefully you guys do not burn me at the stake for this review here, but appreciate you guys stopping by. Thanks for checking out Project Potter, and until tomorrow night, guys, stay spooky.